Hey there, welcome back to another video. This time it is a review of the 1986 TV movie Acceptable Risks. Now, this is a film that I had seen bits and pieces of on television when I was a kid. I don't remember exactly what channel it was, but it caught my eye and I decided to stick with it, and it was one of the first films that genuinely shocked me. Uh, and after seeing it again, after seeing this film again, I can totally see why this was shocking not only to myself, but also to anyone else that happened to catch this when it aired in 1986. This is one of those movies that, in all honesty, for the most part, if you take away the climax, if you take away the last 20 minutes of the film, it's more of just a average, fairly forgettable bit of TV melodrama. But with the last 15, 20 minutes, it rises above average and becomes ultimately more than just an acceptable TV movie because it has an impact that is immeasurable and a body count that honestly rivals most slasher icons. So this easily is one of those films that, in my opinion, is definitely worth a watch. Not only if you're curious about the movie, but also due to the climax of the film, which is harrowing, it's intense, and it's unforgettable. It really is. It's such an unforgettable climax. It's one of those climaxes that really sticks with you. The final shot of the film is haunting. It's just one of those movies that, despite everything about it that isn't that special, the last 15, 20 minutes are quite remarkable, especially for a TV movie. So it's directed by Rick Wallace, who before this, he just did a lot of TV work. He was a second unit director for John Carpenter's Halloween, but he hadn't done a whole lot of like big films. He was more of a TV guy. Uh, it doesn't even look like he even really directed anything theatrically. He just strictly stayed in the TV realm. And the direction is fine. It's okay. It's acceptable. It's nothing spectacular, but it's acceptable. It's fine. He manages to shoot the sequences of the chemical plant with a certain amount of experience and quality. There really isn't anything in this movie that's shot in a way that I would really say is poor, but he doesn't really have a whole lot of tricks in his book, so to speak, when it comes to directorial techniques. So at times it can look a little stock and a little standard, which is the norm for a lot of TV movies. So this is not any exception. It's written by Norman Strum, and the script has your usual family dynamic with a little bit of family melodrama mixed in with workplace melodrama, with, you know, the chemical plants and how they're cutting corners and how they're trying to meet a certain quota, and the way that they're doing it is risking the population of this small town and the employees and so on and so forth. So it's that typical sort of back and forth, as well as the back and forth with the politicians and in the local community. So it's nothing really stand out when it comes to the screenplay, except for the last 15 to 20 minutes of the movie. That's when it really does stand out in a compelling and genuinely gripping way that honestly is on par with a lot of horror films, despite the fact that it's a TV movie, so you don't see a lot of gore or violence. It still is a really effective bit of horror in the last 15, 20 minutes of the movie, because it just shows you the worst case scenario for what might happen if there is a chemical leak at a chemical plant. And it's horrific. It really is. So the film also features some good performances. Brian Dennehy as Don Shepard, the main man at the chemical plant, which I believe, I'm trying to remember what the name of the chemical plant is. I think it's called Chemtex or City Chem. That's what it's called. It's called City Chem. So he's the main man at City Chem at this plant in a small town in California, a fictional small town that is not real, but it's based on a small town uh, in America. So what happens is he's stretched thin, as are his employees, by the higher ups to try to meet a certain quota for this chemical that they're making at this plant. And while they're dealing with that, there's this thing going on with this. I don't know if corrupt is the right word, but a sleazy businessman who wants to set up a housing development close to the chemical plant because it's a good prime location in the town and there's space available, and the city council actually approves the building of this housing development. So the housing development is built and it's only a mile or so away from the chemical plant, and unbeknownst to all these people who have new homes and a new place to live and hopefully thrive, they're in danger. And that ultimately leads to the climax of the film where shit really hits the fan. So, Brian Dennehy, he does a really good job with the role he's asked to play. He's charismatic and likable, but at the same time, he's not perfect. He makes mistakes, and you really do feel for him because you feel like he's a man who's tied between a rock and a hard place. Like, he's trying to do whatever he can to keep his job because that's what's putting food on the table. That's what's, helping him support his family. But it's one of those things where there are risks involved, and he has to question whether or not they're acceptable. And throughout the film, that's really this struggle that he's dealing with, is what risks are acceptable and what risks are not. And ultimately, he has to see the worst possible scenario in order for him to really understand what acceptable risks are. So he's the heart and soul of the film, and he does a really good job connecting everything together at the best that he can. Kenneth McMillan's also pretty solid as Wes Boggs, who's an employee of the chemical plant, a longtime employee and friend of Dawn's. Christine Ebersole, she's there as Lee Snyder. She's the love interest for Dawn, and also a new employee at the plant. I mean, I've never really thought that she was the best actress, even when she was on Saturday Night Live. So here, it's really no exception. It's just an adequate performance on her part. And then there's a bunch of other actors who are in the movie who deliver, pretty decent performances as well when it comes to what they're asked to do. But I'd probably say Cicely Tyson is the other big name. She plays Janet Fram, who is the one member of the city council who has her head in the right place and is trying to get people to understand the gravity of the situation with this chemical plant. And the bought and paid for politicians aren't really hearing any of it. They don't even want to put together a new updated pamphlet to warn the new people who live in the housing development next to the chemical plant about what could potentially happen and what the risks are, because it'll cost too much money. And their whole thing is, well, nothing's happened at the plant for 30 years, so why is it going to happen now? there's a there's a good scene in the film where Cicely Tyson's character comes across a one of the higher ups at the chemical plant in terms of management, and I think it's like the PR guy, and she comes across and talks to him, and she's trying to get him to provide her information about what chemicals are being used in this plant, like what potential exposure are we talking about here? And he's talking about how, you know, with anything there are acceptable risks, and she's like, well, how do we know what risks are acceptable if we don't know what the risks are? And that's honestly the perfect way to sum up this film and the message is trying to get across. We really should know more about what is going on at our local chemical plants, because that way we can actually be prepared for a potential catastrophe, and you know there'll be much less loss of life or injury as a result. And it's one of those things where it's not up to us. It's not even up to the city government. It's up to the corporations to agree to release that information to us, because there was a law that was put into effect that effectively enabled corporations to not reveal what is being produced or what kind of chemicals are being created or used in their plants, because of something where they protect their own IP. So it's like it's protecting the patent or the ingredients that go into their products that are chemically made from competitors. And on one hand, I get that, but we're talking about public safety here, so there should be an exception that should be made. But a lot of these corporations, they don't give a fuck about public safety. All they care about is the bottom line, care about their profit margin and their numbers. And this is a film that really does hammer that point home. I also wanted to mention, in terms of the cast, one of the kids, one of the relatives of Dawn's, is played by Scott Curtis, who was Cameron in Cameron's Closet. So I thought it was pretty cool to see Scott Curtis again. But anyway, the film also features a score by Mark Snow of X-Files fame. And the score is pretty decent. It's not spectacular, but there are a couple notes here and there that I thought were noteworthy when it comes to the score. But yeah, where the film really succeeds and where the film really shines is with its last 15 to 20 minutes. It's an old TV movie. It's from 1986, so spoiling anything, I apologize. But it's one of those movies where the ending is kind of predictable, though. Like, why would it be called Acceptable Risks if something doesn't happen? And so I'll just confirm that something definitely does happen, and the loss of life is really high, and so are the consequences, and so is the rate of the number of people who are injured. There are some really intense and scarring sequences in this film. I thought the way that they shot the chemical plant explosion was well done for a low budget. And there are shots like dead kids just and their parents just passed out on the playground with the swings in the background that are just absolutely apocalyptic. And then you have the final shot of the film, which is really, really sad, and definitely leaves a mark. So I don't really know what else to say about Acceptable Risks. If I were to rate it out of 5 stars, I would give the film 3.5 out of 5 stars. Like I said, this is one of those movies that's above average. It's above acceptable, no pun intended, because of the climax, because of its really powerful last 15 to 20 minutes that really hammer the whole point and the whole emphasis of this film home in a way that just really hits you right in the pit of your stomach. So anyway, yeah, I would say if you know you want to see a disaster, another sort of disaster film that you haven't actually had the chance to check out, if you want to check out an obscure TV movie from the 80s with a plot surrounding a chemical plant and a disaster, I would recommend checking this out sometime. Also, if you're a fan of Brian Dennehy, because this has another one of his best performances is in this film. So anyway, yeah, I will say this about this disc though: the picture quality is the best that this has ever looked for a TV movie from the 80s, but the sound is a little off. I don't know if it's my sound bar. I don't know what it is, but I mean I tested it with my speakers on my computer as well. The sound mix is a little quiet. You kind of have to turn it up a lot to be able to hear the dialogue effectively. And then there's a lot of stuff too where it seems like some things are turned up a little bit too much in the sound mix. Like for instance, there are scenes where characters are just walking around and you hear in the surround sound mix, you hear that every footstep that they make. I don't really think that was probably intentional, but it's just one of those things where it just sounds a little off. It's not unwatchable as a result, but it just sounds a little off compared to other DVDs and other titles from Kino Lorber. But anyway, yeah, that's my review of Acceptable Risks. And as always, thanks for watching, and I will see you later. See ya.